Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama.
Hare Krishna, dear devotees, and thank you very much for joining once again on this YouTube channel, Unity in Diversity. And today we're really happy to have His Grace Mahatma Prabhu joining us from Alachua. Hare Krishna, Mahatma Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
So Mahatma Prabhu was born in LA, and at the ripe old age of 19, in 1969, he came into contact with the Krishna consciousness, and right after that, he joined Srila Prabhupada in 1970 and moved in the temple in California. And shortly after, he got first and second initiation. So today, he is one of our leaders of the movement and has served, he continues to serve as an initiating spiritual master, as well as also holding many seminars, retreats, and so on how devotees can improve their Krishna consciousness. He is well known for recorded and live music as well. This is a very classic recording of the Brahma Samhita that was a favorite of mine. Of course, he's done so many workshops and things like japa and humility, forgiveness, vows, marriage, and so on. So he's based in Alachua, Florida, and he travels 4 months of the year, sharing and inspiring others in their Krishna consciousness. So with that, we want to welcome Mahatma Prabhu on today's topic, which is a very vital and pertinent topic of the day, the topic of Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus in ISKCON. So our focus today will not be so much on the Siddhantic differences on both sides of the issue. It'll be more of what possible pathways we can explore to reconcile some of these differences in practical ways. If you may not be aware, the GBC, Governing Body Commission of ISKCON, had a few months ago passed a resolution that our Vaishnavis, the women Diksha, women gurus can offer Diksha as part of their service to Srila Prabhupada. And then a few months later, this was rescinded, and there has been a 3-year moratorium put on it. So we are in that moratorium phase right now and trying to see, what can be done to resolve this issue. So with that, I pass it to Mahatma Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So I want to start with a few stories. You can look this up it must have been the early 80s. There was a debate held in San Diego. It's actually on YouTube, I believe. So some of the leaders of our movement and some of the leaders of the Ritvik movement, which was a new movement at that time, met to discuss the pros and cons. And so the representatives of the Ritviks presented their idea of why this should be instituted, why this is what Prabhupada wanted. He didn't want anyone to initiate. He only wanted devotees to initiate on his behalf. And then the other side, which explained, no, that he did want his disciples to initiate and give the evidence. So I was there living in San Diego, and it was an interesting philosophical discussion. To my knowledge, nothing really changed after that. Those who were convinced on one side or the other left that more convinced. Generally, that's what happens, left more convinced. So let's fast forward now to probably around 1998. I was at that time living in Vrindavan, working with the VIHE. And little to my knowledge, there was another meeting going on with Ritviks and leaders of ISKCON, somewhat similar. I don't know what they were trying to accomplish, but I can tell you the way they were going about it was not going to accomplish anything. And this was just an intuitive response. I just happened across the meeting, and I stood outside looking in the window. The door was actually open, so I could hear what they were saying. So it was similar. There were the proponents of Ritvik, and they were explaining philosophically why this is what Prabhupada wanted and why this would be best for the movement. Then there were the proponents of the Diksha Guru, the living Diksha Guru, why this is siddhantically correct, why this is what our disciplic succession has always taught, and why this is what Prabhupada wanted. So I was observing that, and so this is now my second time I'm observing it, and I'm thinking, why are we wasting time in this discussion? Because at the end of the discussion, as happened before, you just come out more convinced that the other side is wrong, that you're right. That's basically what happens. So I was thinking, why aren't they having a discussion which is based on the premise that we disagree and we will probably never agree? I mean, some people switch over from Riffic to Diksha Guru. Some may have gone the other way, but it's a very small number. So why aren't we discussing how are we going to coexist? Wouldn't that be better? You know, the phrase unity and diversity. Somehow or other, that discussion didn't happen to my knowledge. I thought that would have been more productive. Now, I can't say that ISKCON would want to incorporate Riffic. That's another topic. But at least if there was a discussion on how that could be done, perhaps leaving some temples to choose, okay, this is what you want to do, and leaving some temples to continue with the Diksha Guru, and then respecting one another and devotees' understanding. And, you know, maybe that could work. I don't know if the movement was mature enough, or I don't know if the movement even wants that. But in my mind, a discussion with that as goal would have been more productive. The result of that discussion, as we know, was more division. So now, being a member of Sabha, I've had to deal with other controversial issues by studying everything that is said on one side of the issue and everything that is said on the other side of the issue. And some interesting things are observed. And this is in every issue, it comes out like this. And this is also true of liberals and conservatives in politics, or anytime there is a division culturally or politically. Each side thinks the other side is going to destroy the country or the organization, in this case, ISKCON. Like, if we have Ritvic, it will destroy ISKCON. If you have Diksha Gurus, it will destroy. It is destroying ISKCON. If you have Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus, it will destroy ISKCON. If you don't have Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus, it will destroy ISKCON. And there's reasoning on both sides. Now, here's the second phenomena. And this is going on in ISKCON. We're humans. We are subject to social psychology and other forms of psychology. The other thing, which I've studied happens, but I've read it, the responses, that one side thinks the other side is incapable of understanding, that there's something wrong. They don't have the adhikari, they don't have the samskars, they don't have the intelligence, they don't have the education, whatever it is, to understand the other side. So each side is thinking, what is wrong with the other side? This is so clear. It's so obvious. This is what Prabhupada said. This is what he wants. Why can't they understand what is wrong with him? So in our terms, this is not so much used outside of ISKCON, but in our terms, we're fostering offenses. You are ruining ISKCON, and you don't have the adhikari or the brains to understand what is so obvious to us. So our group, which is pro or anti, we all agree. This is so clear. It's right there in Prabhupada's books. The other side can't see it. Something's wrong with them, vice versa. It's so clear that Prabhupada wants this. Why can't they see? Then we'll accuse them of being smarter Brahmins, ultra conservative. Prabhupada came with this very liberal attitude, and you are now just, you're going against the very thing that Prabhupada did to make Brahmins out of lechas. No, you're going against Varnashram. That was another 50%. This is the future, and you liberals are watering it down and polluting it. So these dynamics are going on. So my point is that this is an endless battle, and it breeds offenses. And as you know, the Vaishnavi Diksha Guru issue has been, I think, since maybe 2001 or 3 or something. So it's been going on a while, and there were mediation for about a year to try to come to some reconciliation, to get both parties to agree to something. That really didn't work that well. And so then the devotees thought, well, we really need to discuss Guru Tattva, because this is an aspect of Guru Tattva. We need to get a better understanding. Okay, that's fine. But many people question, if I'm coming from a certain angle and you're coming from a certain angle, will we ever agree, even though we discussed Guru Tattva threadbare, because we're already discussing Guru Tattva in relation to Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus, we're quoting the same things and we're interpreting it differently. There's also some studies that by nature, some people's brains are a little more liberal and conservative. And so therefore they will tend to see things in a particular way. The conservatives are, it's tradition, don't change things. The liberals are, you have to be adaptable. So, you know, these are factors, psychological, social, cultural. So many of you know what the GBC did in looking at all of this, thought, well, why don't we create a situation in which we will allow individual temples to decide how they want to, if they want to follow or how they want to follow this particular resolution. You can follow it, or it says Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus. You can follow it or not in your area. They came up with this with another issue. There was a resolution, and it was culturally sensitive because in some countries this would not go over well, and they knew it. So they said, you do not have to follow this resolution if it doesn't work in your country. So that was the best the GBC could come up with. Those against female Diksha Gurus are saying this is not Siddhantic, it's going to ruin ISKCON, et cetera, et cetera. We need to discuss it more. Those for it are thinking we've already discussed it. We're on our 18th year or whatever. So, you know, so the question is, if we're just having a Siddhantic war, you know, who's got the best shloka, you know? You got me with that shloka, but I pull it out and I shoot my shloka. Oh, I got you. Obviously, that's not the way Prabhupada wants us to work. So my personal concern is that in ISKCON, there should be more of a reconciliation attitude of sitting down together, of like, let's just admit we disagree. Let's admit we are different. Let us see how we can work this out together. And that culturally sensitive resolution is probably the best thing that we're going to come up with. Say, okay, you want to do it this way? Okay, in your community, that's fine. You can do it this way. And everyone who agrees with that will be happy. Oh, there's a place where women are not gurus. There's a place where women are just mothers and grandmothers. They're not going to be leaders. There's a place where we're establishing traditional varnashram, that all the devotees who want to live that way will gravitate toward that, and they have a place. It's good. At the same time, there's others who don't relate to that at all. And for whatever reason, you can say there's something wrong with them, they're malechas, but that's not where the discussion should go. But they don't relate to it. And so in other places, they feel like, no, we need to be a little more liberal and open, because in the West nowadays, people who are thinking about joining religious movements, they look at how do you treat women and how do you treat the environment. Those are like the two things they're really looking at. And so we know that. And we know that there's people who will become devotees, but there's hurdles they have to jump over. And we don't want to make those hurdles so high that they can't jump over, knowing that they would have become devotees if we could lower those hurdles or make or have a situation which just makes them feel more comfortable to be part of an organization that represents things that are very important for people in the West. That's what we're dealing with. So my personal feeling is that there needs to be more energy put into reconciliation and less energy into Siddhantic wars once we realize that there's a clash. And these Siddhantic wars are interesting, because I don't know if you all know this, but years and years and years ago, during the lifetime of Srila Prabhupada's godbrother, Sridhar Maharaj, he was asked this question about female gurus, because it was coming up. The whole guru issue was always an issue. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but after the original 11, they were very reluctant to allow anybody to initiate after that. I mean, for a few years, nobody could get in. Even you'd have to push and ask every year. And they were afraid to expand it. I think they thought that they were the chosen ones and no one else was qualified. But when Prabhupada was asked, who's your successor? He said, there isn't one. Whoever has heard, who's ever qualified, they can do it. So What was I saying? I forgot. I got so excited. What was my last point?
No, it's just the notion of like how it's always been hard to change. There's a time when it's hard to change, and even Sridhar Maharaj said,
Oh yeah, so Sridhar Maharaj, so he was asked, and he said, yes, some, there can be some. It wasn't even a debate. He just, said something like, okay, that's interesting.
in reference to women, you mean?
Yeah, and that's Sridhar Maharaj is as I was told, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta said he understood Siddhanta, that this, not that he was the only one, but he specifically pointed out Bhakti Rakshash, which
Bhakti
means
Rakshaka, yeah. Bhakti Rakshaka, yeah.
He's the protector of Bhakti. He understands Siddhanta. Okay, so, and so the anti-Vaishnavi Diksha gurus think, okay, it's not a Siddhanta, it's not Shastric. Here's a very learned devotee, very elevated. He said, yes. Now, we found out recently, Jadharani, Shamarani, whose Siksha guru is Narayan Maharaj, has started initiating, which indicates at least Narayan Maharaj was favorable, or I would assume she wouldn't do it if he wasn't. Perhaps he even asked her, I don't know. But unless he was favorable to that, he's also a learned scholar. And we hear there is a Gaudiya Math female. Some people debate whether that's authorized or not. But the point I'm making is not right or wrong. I'm just saying this debate of, well, you're not learned in Shastra, and therefore you don't understand that in Shastra this is not allowed. It doesn't hold a lot of water, because there are very, very learned devotees on both sides of it. And I think that to me, this is a real crucial point in the history of ISKCON, because this is not going to be the last controversy by any means. And I feel like how we traverse this controversy is going to set an example for future generations of how to deal with it. And if we fail and there's a split, that's going to set a precedent that you don't, if it's right and you believe it's right, you don't compromise, you go forward, even at the cost of leaving ISKCON or not cooperating. So we're on the cusp of that, because we've heard that some leaders said, well, this is wrong, it's going to ruin ISKCON, and we can't cooperate with the GBC on this. So a higher position is to realize that there are valid arguments on both sides, and there's going to be these irreconcilable differences, and the conversation has to go beyond who's right and who's wrong and what is Siddhanta. I don't think it's bad to talk about Guru Tattva. I think we need to. I think that's good, but we should recognize that Guru Tattva is achintya, and so there's going to be some differences. There's the inconceivable nature of it, that Shastra says. It's inconceivable. So-and-so is your guru. He was my roommate, 35 years ago. I know every fault he has. How could he be your guru? But for you, he's everything. So these things, have to be reconciled on a different platform.
That's interesting. You brought up the point about accommodating certain sensibilities, especially you're saying we're preaching the West, and they will evaluate us based on our practiced values. For example, how we take care of the environment. That's important here in America.
Yes.
To many people who are evaluating, it tends to be a strong point of anybody who's in a liberal stance. And we've noticed, at least in the West, that the majority of the seekers who are coming to look in Eastern religions, yoga, and especially in Krishna consciousness, tend to be of that liberal slant. So they subscribe to this notion of equality among the sexes and so on, and
That's true.
the environment. So, but then the criticism from the other side is that why should we change our Siddhanta to kowtow or to pander to people's sensibilities just to get some cheap popularity,
Right.
But at the same time, I see that Srila Prabhupada, he was very happy to make certain accommodations, and then he would justify them with Siddhanta. Like, for example, he was even criticized by his god brother. Srila Prabhupada's god brother was criticizing that, you're engaging both boys and girls together. That's unacceptable. And Prabhupada wrote in a purport to Chaitanya Charitamrita that some jealous persons criticize us because it engages both boys and girls in distributing love of Godhead. These fools and rascals criticize boys and girls for intermingling. But these rascals should consider that one cannot suddenly change a community's social customs. So Prabhupada is using very heavy language, fools and rascals. And then he says that I'm engaging both in boys and girls because the girls are as good as their brothers who are preaching Krishna consciousness. Therefore, to engage both of them in full transcendental activity is a policy intended to spread the Krishna conscious movement. Then again, he says, these jealous fools who criticize the intermingling of boys and girls simply have to be satisfied with their own foolishness because they cannot think of how to spread Krishna consciousness by adopting ways and means that are favorable to this purpose. Their stereotype methods will never help spread Krishna consciousness. This is not just a remark that he spoke while morning walk. It's the purport of Chaitanya Charitamrita. You know, so I mean, so you can see, like you're saying, Prabhu, that this is Prabhupada's, you know, mode of operation, and in the West we have to make some kind of adjustment, and the adjustment we're making isn't any different from what Srila Prabhupada is highlighting here. It's not some other new thing we're trying, you know. So
yeah, and then that purport, he said you can't do in the West what you do in India.
East, right.
I mean, obviously it's not an endless open opportunity to compromise. Of course not. But as you were saying, Prabhupada's looking at the effect on preaching. That to him is of utmost importance. We don't want to do anything that would cause people to have a bad impression of ISKCON. We don't want to compromise our philosophy, but so he was able to balance both.
Right.
And I have a story.
Yes.
Oh, you want to go ahead?
No, please go ahead.
This is an amazing story. I don't know if all of you know this story. So in 1969, there was a kirtan in the university, I don't know, what's it called in Columbus? University of Ohio University. Yeah. And I read about it in BTG. I had just started becoming a devotee, and it was described in BTG that like 1,000 students came. Allen Ginsberg was there. So Allen Ginsberg was a big figure, and he was leading kirtan, and devotees were doing kirtan. Students were like jumping up in their seats. It was like the kirtan of kirtans, like probably the all-time kirtan at any college from what I know. So, and Prabhupada was going to speak, and there was a problem with the microphone stand, and they didn't have a proper holder for the microphone. So he needed something to tie the microphone to the stand, and Allen Ginsberg said, well, you can use my shoelace. Prabhupada was like, no. He called up Narayan Prabhu, who recently left his body, and said, I need your Brahmin thread to tie the microphone up to the microphone stand, which is like, really? Yeah. So why? There's a higher purpose. You can get another thread. So I just thought that was, it was interesting that Prabhupada would do something, which is it's kind of sacred. You don't take your thread off. You don't use it to tie something up. He also did that, with the key, put the key on your thread because this key was important. Like, I put my key in my thread and I feel like my thread is a key holder. I don't think so. But so, and Prabhupada was obviously practical. But I think the main point that comes out of this is that the concern for spreading Krishna consciousness, like we need this microphone, and it's not a big thing if we use a thread, although we shouldn't, but this is more like, levels of importance. So, when we're dealing with certain realities, like some devotees will not take Diksha from a man. I don't want to say a lot, but some won't. Or some are waiting, waiting. So these are realities we have to deal with. And we have to be, sensitive to both, both sides have to be sensitive to one another. And that's the difficulty. Then there's the argument that if we allow Vaishnavis to initiate, it's going to ruin our reputation in India, even if we allow them to initiate in the West.
Mm.
So, you know, that's an issue the devotees in the West have to be sensitive to. But at the same time, devotees in the West feel the same way. That if we don't, it's going to negatively impact our preaching. And as we said, many people will, you know, many people who want to be interested in ISKCON, they look down the list. What do you do about this? What do you do?
Right,
And
right.
then I had a prospective disciple, and she said, "Did you take the vaccine?" And I said, "Taking or not taking is not the qualification of a guru." But she said, "I will not take a guru who takes the vaccine."
Oh, wow.
So, you know,
Means
you
a
might
lot.
say,
Yeah. It means a
so you
lot.
might, yeah, so you might say, well, you know, come on, she's not really qualified, and et cetera, et cetera. Maybe that's true, but you can't deny the fact that some people think that way. And
Mm.
so, you know, some sensitivities have to be there. We have to understand how people are looking at us and evaluating us, and,
Right.
you know, watching our behaviors and actions. Do they line up with what we teach? And
That's an interesting angle about looking at other religious organizations and what they think of us. And that's one of the other angles that our traditionalists have taken in India, that they're now doing interviews with members or leaders of, say, the Sri Sampradaya, and they're posting these interviews on YouTube, putting the letters out there that
yeah,
these authorities saying we can never have women gurus. But it's interesting because I was observing that, and I realized that if the same, say, Sri Sampradaya leaders were asked if you can have gurus who are born in Mleccha or non-Brahmin families, those same people will say, no, absolutely not. You cannot have Mleccha gurus in Vaishnavism. But those parts are left out, or they're not asked those questions. So even there's some cherry picking going on that, yes, see, they're saying, and they'll look at us as we are no longer a valid Vaishnava movement, and we will lose face in the society of Vaishnava movement. So that's one angle. But then those ultra orthodox, you can call them, they would also shake their heads at the fact that we have so many white people and black people leaders, you know.
isn't it also that they've come to see that these Mlecchas are bona fide, and they've come to, by the grace of Prabhupada's power, they've come to see that also. So, you know, perhaps 60 years ago they would say no, but now there are many aspects. I don't know the Sri Sampradaya that well, but I know that they do initiate Mlecchas, Westerners.
Mm-hmm.
So
The Puri Maharaj story, I think you mentioned that one time, the Puri Maharaj, Prabhupada's godbrother.
yeah, Puri Maharaj didn't want to take prasadam
Cooked by Mlecchas, right?
Yeah, because we were Mlecchas. So that runs deep in the blood of the Brahmin class in India, even amongst the Vaishnavas.
But
That
he changed his mind later on, right?
and later in his life, in the last days, he took prasadam because he saw. So I was thinking when I heard that is the tradition in the Sri Sampradaya. I heard that, but then I thought, look what Prabhupada did. He took people completely outcasts out of Varnashram, not even, you know, we say, you know, Kalo Shudra Shambhava, but not really even Shudra. And he made them Brahmins, and it was a real, you know, slap in the face to the Brahmin community. And of course, they didn't like it. So if Prabhupada could do that, and he could elevate his disciples to the position of Brahmin and then Guru, Siksha Guru, Diksha Guru, would it not be a minimization of Prabhupada to say that he doesn't have the Shakti to do that for women? Because again, it's by birth. Women disqualified by birth, Striya Vaishyas Tata Shudras, but we're all disqualified. And also what's interesting is, you know, by birth, we're all disqualified to even have this discussion, because we're not even, there's no question that we could elevate ourselves, not until we take birth in a Brahmin family. So it's an interesting discussion that we Mlecchas are pontificating on such things, which, as one time Prabhupada said, you cannot touch Manu Samhita, because we're outcasts. How can we touch it?
Right.
You know, so, and as you said, that's not where Prabhupada went. And I also, Prabhupada's preaching mood was, there was this slap in the face, because when he was preaching in India, who did he ask to lead kirtan? Who did he ask to give a lecture? Often it was Jamuna.
Mona, yeah.
So that was a slap in the face. Okay, not only white, but white female, like in Indian culture, the women took a subordinate position generally, although there were female gurus, but generally. And so Prabhupada wanted to go, no, that we're making a statement here that anyone can become a Vaishnava. So if anyone can become a Vaishnava, anyone can become a Brahmin, if that statement is there and Prabhupada showed that, why would we stop at any point and say they can become everything but this? That's something that those on the side who want to see women as gurus, they have a hard time. They really have a hard time, because they feel like Prabhupada, this was one of his missions, to establish this, that we can become Brahmins, we can become gurus. And now our own people are saying, no, you can't. It seems counterproductive, and using Shastra. So this is where this irreconcilable difference will be there, because they'll say, no, but it says right here in Shastra, it's right there. They can't. So, and then you also know the argument that, we have to go to Shastra, not Prabhupada's letters or conversations and so forth. That's a whole other discussion,
Right.
an interesting discussion. It's almost like saying, if Prabhupada came here and said, do this, would we say, no, I'm not going to do it because in your books, in Shastra, it doesn't say to do it? I don't think we would be that foolish.
That's what we're hearing a lot, actually, that Prabhupada, he may have said in a letter, you should do this, but according to the purport, it seems the opposite. So we should follow the purport because the purport has more weight or something like that. We're already hearing quite a bit of that.
Yeah, that's there. But it's not that he didn't say those things in purports as well.
Right.
But there's a funny anecdote. There was one devotee who was saying that. We were actually having a discussion among some devotees about the relative value of Prabhupada's books, his lectures, his letters, and so forth. And so there's, it's kind of become common knowledge or an assumption that letters are secondary or less important. In some way, they're less important, not to be taken in the way you take his books. And one devotee was making the point, if you study the many, many books that devotees have written, you will see that they heavily quote Prabhupada's letters. And what was so interesting was one devotee who was making this statement very strong that letters are secondary. He had written a book, and one of the devotees went through that book and said there were like 63 citations from Prabhupada's letters in that book.
Yes.
So the point is, we depend very much on the letters, because those letters often discuss things which are not discussed in his books, practical things like GBC. Where's the formation of the GBC in his books? Although Prabhupada says we should have a GBC and cooperate, but the details. So, that's another discussion. But a lot of devotees feel they don't feel good about that kind of discussion in which you just write off something that Prabhupada said because he didn't put it exactly in his books.
And there's a classic example in the Nectar of Devotion. Prabhupada writes that all devotees must first worship Lord Ganesh. It's there. It's right there in black and white in the book.
Right.
But then when a devotee then wrote to Srila Prabhupada about it, he asked Prabhupada, I'm going to start worshiping Ganesh. Prabhupada said, fine, but you must pay me like $35,000 a day or some ridiculous amount. He was being sarcastic. He's saying, you're trying to be more Catholic than the Pope right now. I told you you're not supposed to worship. So what if it's in the book? Listen to my letter. So that's another example where actually letter has more weight than the book.
Yeah. It's in real time. Yeah. So, but anyway, it's another irreconcilable difference, because because there's the more traditionalist will say Shastra is the authority and Guru will not say anything that's not supported by Shastra. And if he does, we can't accept it because you must have Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. You have to have all three, and then you can say, this is a pramanam, all three. So there's some difference of agreement with that because, if Prabhupada says, I want you to do this, you won't, most devotees won't go and look through his books and say, but I didn't find validation in your book, so I don't think I have to do it. We obviously we didn't deal with Prabhupada that way. We took Prabhupada's words as absolute, as shastric, as Krishna speaking through him, and so forth. So these are sensitive issues. They're valid points on either side. I don't want to say that it's not Guru Sadhana Shastra. I don't mean that, but it's just the point is you will see that the conservative mind, the liberal mind, will look at things differently, and it's an eternal reality, and a lot of that is also culturally informed, that people in a certain part of a country, because of the culture, will tend to see things a certain way. But that culture is dynamic. 100 years from now, they may not see it that way. They may see it differently. They may see it the way people in the West see it. So, we don't want to change Siddhanta, obviously, because of the culture, but we still have to recognize that sometimes Siddhanta is being seen through a cultural lens, and that's where the disagreements come, and their disagreements are inevitable. And again, isn't it more productive to sit down and say, okay, let's just acknowledge these are realities we disagree with, rather than spending the rest of our life trying to convince one another that we're right and there's something wrong with you because you can't understand that we're right.
Yeah.
And then risk this greatest fear that Prabhupada had, which was to create factions within ISKCON. I want to tell a story because this is an amazing story. When 1972, when the cornerstone ceremony for the first building in Mayapur was laid, it was a big thing for ISKCON to have a place in Mayapur. So Prabhupada invited all his godbrothers, and it's very, very amazing what he said. This is 1972. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta left in 1936. So we're looking at 36 years later. Prabhupada says, to his godbrothers, we should form a GBC and conjointly preach around the world. Wow. So that really underscores dramatically how much Prabhupada wanted to fulfill that order of a unified mission. Even though there are so many disagreements, still, somehow or other, we have to come together and preach. This is what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta wanted. I think that's, it's very important for every follower of Srila Prabhupada to understand how important this was for Prabhupada, even if we disagree. Just somehow or other, humble ourselves to be able to harmoniously work with one another, respect one another's views, even if we totally disagree with them. Respect those Vaishnavas not as foolish, but that they have integrity, they have a different way of seeing things. And often you see on the internet, there's so much disrespect going on, which is antithetical to everything Prabhupada taught us about Vaishnava relationships. So little Trinada P never hurt.
That's an interesting point about the Prabhupada wanted to harmonize even with his godbrothers and even kind of bring them into the fold as the larger GBC umbrella, as the reunite the various Gaudiya branches. This is a pretty bold move while still recognizing this diversity of opinion, but he wanted to unify. So I'm sure that, and even his Prabhupada's famous last words that he said so famously about, you should cooperate. I'll be so happy. You'll show your love for me, but how you cooperate and work with one another. So I think that now that we're at a Siddhantic, say, impasse, some of the options, the worst case scenario is we split up, have your own movement. This will be ISKCON liberal movement, ISKCON conservative movement, or two different ISKCONs, right? Or then what are the other options? There's, okay, perhaps we do cultural sensitive geographically. Maybe we do a trial period pilot program kind of thing. Let's give it 3 years and see what happens. Instead of 3-year moratorium, make it a 3-year pilot program and see how much chaos, because they're saying there'll be utter chaos when women become Diksha gurus. Is it going to be more chaotic than the 80s that we went through? I don't know, so let's see what happens. I mean, elderly women, what kind of chaos they're going to cause, So I mean, these are some options. Maybe we can discuss some of those next steps or possibilities.
Yeah, I also thought initially when arguments were being thrown around pro and con, I initially thought there's a lot of theory here. And I think a lot of us from the West, when we heard that female gurus would not be accepted in India, we had a hard time with that because there are female gurus. And of course, we never had a female president and India had a female prime minister. So so really, like you said, it was coming, I believe, from the Sri Sampradaya. And I thought, okay, one side is saying this is going to be destructive, as you mentioned. One side is saying this is going to be very productive. We need it. One side is saying the females have inherent frailties, which make it impossible for them, unless they're liberated souls, Mahabhagavats, to perform the function of guru. The other side is saying they're already performing it. They're already Siksha gurus. They already have disciples. Why not let them officially take them? So it was, it's like, it wasn't making sense. Both sides weren't making sense to one another. And it was very theoretical. This isn't going to work. No, this is going to work. Well, then I thought, like you said, well, okay, well, let's do a 3-year experiment. Let's see. Does it work? Are they really unqualified? Is there havoc? Is there havoc in the circles of the female Diksha gurus? Are their disciples having difficulty? Is it causing problems for temples? Is it causing problems for others? Let's see. Let them initiate a small number. That there was reluctance to do that because there was conviction that it would be destructive, adharmic, against varnashram, against shastra, and so forth. And that's why that didn't happen. But then some devotees said, wait a minute, we have a moratorium. You want to discuss Guru Tattva, so we're putting a moratorium. Just let's stop the female Diksha Guru issue. We need to discuss this more. Well, why not stop all initiations? Like, why just women? If we doubt that we understand Guru Tattva carefully, succinctly, properly, essentially, then if that's true, and Vaishnavi Diksha Guru is a part of that misunderstanding, but not the whole misunderstanding, it's an aspect of it, then why didn't we say, why didn't the GBC, or why couldn't they say, okay, we're going to stop all initiations because we want to reevaluate this. Like some gurus are initiating hundreds, 500 at a time. Is that something we want to continue? Is that something good? Is it proper? Is it part of our tradition? Should we limit the number of gurus? Should we limit to geographic locations so the gurus can take, there's so many questions. How do you worship a Madhyam Adhikari, Madhyam Bhakta? They're being worshipped often like Mahabhagavats, all these questions. Okay, let's put it on hold for everyone. And then come back to the table after we discuss this, and then we can go forward. And probably there's going to be some head bashing, and we're going to probably end up in the same position and say we're going to have to be culturally sensitive because we just don't agree on everything. And we will agree on many things, but not everything. So I often think about this because I travel a lot. I wish I only traveled 4 months. It's more like 6, 7, 8 now. And so I get to see a lot of temples. And when you see a lot of temples, you get to see the problems devotees have in relating to one another and so forth. And it's that empathy and humility that is so important in being able to work together, and that sensitivity to realities that not everybody's going to see things the way I see it. And I have to acknowledge that and accept that. Even if I believe I'm 108% right and they're 108% wrong. But sometimes there's absolutely nothing I can do because I'm not in charge of that person's mind and strategy and so forth. I think more of that needs to enter the mainstream of ISKCON, more of that kind of training, more of that kind of understanding, because it becomes, it seems to me, as an observer of these discussions, that these discussions are degrading into something less. I'll just say it this, not completely sattvic. I'll be polite and say it. It's not as sattvic as it needs to be. And when it's not sattvic, then there's disagreement, and that well, there will be disagreement, but the disagreement will lead to quarrel, offenses, and schisms, perhaps, which Prabhupada wanted us to avoid at all costs. So I think that's really the bottom line, avoiding schisms in the name of being sensitive to the needs of others and respecting those needs, respecting the intelligence of others.
So even though we may have some Siddhantic disagreements, I think we should at least agree, not just agree to disagree, but agree that the highest principle is to remain united and find a way where that is never compromised. And we should remain one, entity. We should remain one ISKCON. I mean, it was a big schism in the whole country of the United States with Civil War. Those kind of things have happened, and still, but unity was so important, and we maintained that. So if ISKCON can remain united, that'll be a big win. It'll be a travesty if we can't maintain that. I mean, even today, we do have cultural differences, and we see them within ISKCON, and they're implemented that way. For example, like, women pujaris, right? We have women pujaris in the West. In India, you won't find them on the altar for the most temples. And that's fine. Nobody's crying about it. Maybe a few might be upset, but in general, we're still united, and that's okay. So if we could extend that same principle to this discussion, I think in very practical terms, it would seem that's a very good way. Either we go on the pilot program, or we make it regional. We could have even regionalized to individual temples. So if there's a temple in North America that very strongly believes in the conservative principle, that's also maybe okay.
Yeah, respect. We respect that.
Yeah.
We're already doing that. If you have, if I go to your temple, one of your temples in New Jersey, and I go out to a college and I start meeting Americans, then I might say, well, let me have a program for them, because I don't think they're going to like the prasadam you serve on Sunday, because for them it's too spicy and too this or that. But if we don't make it spicy, then the Indians won't like it, and they'll complain. So that's just natural.
Yeah.
That's a natural common sense adjustments,
right,
that we make anyway. And my feeling is that, as I said before, this is not going to be the last controversy. And if we have, I don't think ISKCON has, this is my personal opinion, I don't think ISKCON has handled division well. We tend to just like, get out, like, we don't want you, just leave us alone, which in some cases maybe that is the best decision, but I don't think we tried enough to be more accommodating. I don't think we had enough of these discussions. Or maybe we need to mature in our consciousness so that we can accommodate differences under a broader umbrella. Because, Prabhupada's trying to unite the whole Gaudiya Mat. I mean, that's like an important example that hangs over us. He was always trying to do that, always encouraging his guys, come, work together, let's do this. This is what Bhaktisiddhanta wanted. So he was always saying, this is what Bhaktisiddhanta wanted. So we can be saying, this is what Prabhupada wants. He wants us to work together. He wants us to be unified in some way. He doesn't want our energy to go against one another. So now, this energy goes into fighting one another, where our energy is supposed to go into fighting Maya, not fighting one another.
Yeah.
And so I think, this is my personal opinion, perhaps I'm wrong, but I think we can do better in this department. I think we need to do better. And if we don't, then at some point we won't be equipped to deal with these huge controversies, and it will naturally cause a split where it is unnecessary, because we can allow it to go on under one umbrella without, like the Ritvik, one of the problems with the Ritvik issue was that the Ritviks were basing part of their philosophy on what they saw as the disqualification of Prabhupada's disciples to be gurus. And so in order to establish that, they were condemning gurus, especially when a guru made a mistake or fell down, then that became sensational news for them. But even when they didn't, they would try to find some fault and magnify that. And so, looking at it in a different way, we could say, okay, we believe that this is what Prabhupada wanted, but we're also willing to acknowledge that not everybody agrees with that. And there are places where people will take their own disciples and represent Prabhupada that way. And as time goes on, we start to see there's less difference between the Ritviks and us than there were, 30, 40 years ago, because we realize how much we need to connect our disciples to Srila Prabhupada. And it's almost a kind of Ritvik, except they're not Prabhupada's disciples, they're ours, but in many other ways. It is. And in many other ways, the Ritviks made points which were valid, which many devotees in ISKCON made. So there are many similarities. If that criticism would stop, that might have opened doors to say, okay, in your temples, you can do it this way. In our temples, we'll do it this way. Let's stop the in-house fighting. Well, let's just say this will be a branch of ISKCON that does this. At least you could have a discussion like that. These are the rules. Let's at least talk about it. Can it work? Is it possible? Let's stop the fighting, stop the blasphemy. That's what I would like to see. I think that's the direction we need to be going. And I think it's possible, but it requires a certain mentality. Many devotees have noticed that the second generation, our children, our children have joined various mats. And it's not a problem for them. Somehow it's not a problem. They're still very close. You might say, well, because they're not organizing a movement. Maybe that's true. But it seems somehow or other, they're able to get along a little better. They don't see those differences as really impediments to working together, to having close relationships. And I think that's beautiful. And I think we need a little more of that.
Yeah, it's a sign of natural maturity as time passes. Things should settle into something that's positive rather than divisive or aggravating unnecessarily.
And I think the cultural sensitivity issue was based on that realization that if we're going to stay together, we're going to have to adapt to differences which we totally disagree with, but we're going to have to allow them to exist, and we have to allow them to exist in a way where we respect them. We don't condemn. We stop condemning, because, of course, that's Maya's trick. If she can get us to create wars within our ranks, then we run the risk of self-destruction.
Well, thank you so much, Mahatma Prabhu, for those very wise words and this very important topic of unity and diversity. Even philosophically, there's so many differences and so on. We've seen even our great acharyas have had differences of opinion and so on. Yet, even in the spiritual world, it is said there's differences of opinion, and yet Krishna is the center. He remains the uniting or unifying force. So I hope that we can also keep Prabhupada in the center. And
you just reminded me of one last thing, which I think is kind of the icing on this, is that, when Prabhupada talked about unity and diversity, and he said that diversity is there because we're individuals, you shouldn't expect that we're going to be the same. But the unity is that we're all trying to please Krishna. And so I think that's really important. When, let's say, you say something and I totally disagree with, but I understand that you're saying that because you believe this is what Prabhupada wanted, and you want to satisfy Prabhupada. And that's why you're doing this. That's why you're saying this. That respect, that I know I don't like what you're saying. And sometimes when I don't like what you're saying, it causes me to dislike you. It's just a natural consequence.
Yeah.
How could I wouldn't want to be friends with this guy. Look at what he's saying. He's irrational. He's ultra this, ultra liberal, ultra conservative. He's so black and white, or he's so gray, whatever it is. But when we understand, no, he's just trying to to understand how to serve Prabhupada in the best way possible. And I see that sincerity. That's what Prabhupada said is the unifying force. I'm trying to please Krishna just like you are. We just are approaching it from different perspectives. And if we can acknowledge that, that's extremely important. Otherwise, we're going to fight and we're going to make offenses. And that fighting and offenses is going to wear us down, and it's destructive. It's a little acid within our movement that's slowly going to burn bigger and bigger holes. So I think that's really important. Hare Krishna. You know, I heard like in the 90s, they brought in some professional consultants to help ISKCON manage. And so they studied everything Prabhupada said. And you know what their conclusion was? They said, you should just follow what your guru told you. Like, okay, yeah. Trinadapi Suni Chena, yeah. That'll work. That'll go a long way in helping us.
Yes.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much. And with that, we will take your leave. And thank you, dear devotees, for joining again on this channel. And please stay tuned. We'll have more and more devotees coming and talking on this topic of unity and diversity. And we hope that you can benefit from the discussions and perhaps take something home. And of course, please check our channel every now and then. About once a week or so, we'll be at least putting a couple of interviews. So we look forward to seeing more of you. Hare Krishna. And thank you once again, Mahatma Prabhu.
You're welcome.
Srila Prabhupada.